Hello everyone, welcome back to the Zach F1 channel, and in today's video I'm coming back at you with another F1 fantasy video heading into the British Grand Prix, which will be at Silverstone. Now let's talk about my team last week, and up to about lap 64 we were on for a really good finishing position, and then what happens? Norris and Verstappen crash. I'm not salty at all, definitely not. However, that kind of spoiled the whole weekend, and because of that we've dropped down a bit in the global leagues. However, we push again into Silverstone because what we've learned is a lot of the stuff is the same as what we saw in Austria. We just got very unlucky. But before we do that, make sure to like and subscribe, follow my Twitter, join my league, and join my Discord for any more discussions on F1 Fantasy. So first off, we need to talk about how nothing has changed with my thinking going into F1 Fantasy. And by that, I mean Ferrari still don't look like a good constructor to have. If you go over and take off all of their points from what they would have got this weekend if Verstappen and Norris didn't crash, you would have seen they still wouldn't have got enough. They actually got a lot of fastest pit stop points, 15, which is quite rare from Ferrari, so good on them for that. However, if they didn't have the fastest pit stops, if they didn't have Norris and Verstappen crashing into each other, they wouldn't have had a good weekend, and we would have been right about not having them. And in a similar fashion, if Verstappen hadn't crashed into Norris, we probably would have seen Norris get a 5-second penalty, but I doubt he would have been able to get a 5-second gap to Verstappen. So it would have been Verstappen first, getting around 44 points, which is 19 more points than he did get this weekend, which gives Red Bull 75 points overall. Editing Zach here, just realised I did add Verstappen's points with the fastest lap, which obviously he wouldn't have got in this situation. However, even with Red Bull only getting 9 extra points, Mercedes wouldn't have got 76 points. So you get that. So you get the idea of it. However, another constructor would have been better, which would have been McLaren, as Norris would have got a whopping 49 points overall without the issues that both of them had, which would have made McLaren have 91 points as a constructor. So all in all, we can go into Austria from Silverstone, even though it didn't work out in Austria, knowing that the teams we're going for are the better options. It's just it didn't work out this weekend, and as we've seen with the points, they would have done better without this crash, so it's not anything to worry about. And then a quick mini little point, which is Norris still is the best premium driver to have. Like we've seen again and again, like I showed in points, if Norris and Verstappen hadn't have crashed out, Norris still would have got more points, even coming second place. Again, Norris still managed to get driver of the day even when he didn't actually technically finish the race. F1 Fantasy wise, he did finish the race. He was just, 7 laps behind they put him as in the classifications. However, Norris still very much the best bet. It looks like McLaren in general are putting the fight to Red Bull. So I'm expecting to see, again, another big fight between Norris and Verstappen going into Silverstone. And we know what happened there a few years ago when a Brit and Verstappen were going at each other. And it didn't end well. We could say that. Then talking about cheap driver-wise key points, we need to talk about Haas because they always deliver. And I did say K-Mag I thought still was the best premium driver in my video. However, I went into my live stream saying I don't see how he manages to do well here. But I did specifically say managed to pull something off out of nowhere. And that's exactly what even him and Hulkenberg did. And I think it really shows, bar Monaco, Haas really are the drivers you need in, and if you can afford to bring them in as cheap drivers, they're the top 2 to bring in above anyone else. However, I don't want anyone to get distracted about their constructor points. They did very well as a constructor. Overall, they'll never score more than 40 points on a weekend. They got very lucky this weekend, so please be aware of that, as this won't happen every weekend. And then finally, key points wise, it is no longer a sprint race weekend going in to Silverstone. It was only for Austria, so we're back to the normal free practice sessions, qualifying and race, which means we will have a normal deadline stream going into the qualifying. Now let's talk about the best drivers under 8 million. And oh boy, we have a lot to talk about, because guess what? None of them are good. I am being deadly serious when I say if you can afford with your teams, especially with the builds going more towards single premium driver teams, there's no point in having any of them. Zhou, Bottas and Sargent all look like the worst 3 options to use. Now, out of all of them, Zhou I still think overall looks the best. He didn't have the best weekend. Started from the pit lane. They put him on hards for the first stint. It really didn't work out for him this weekend. But again, Sargent just getting into sloppy contact, dropping to the back, and he's nowhere for the rest of the race, getting us 0 points. And at this point, we really do need to say, if you can have all your drivers over 8 million, it's such a better shout. Then best drivers under 11 million, we have to go straight to the Haas drivers. I still think Kevin Magnussen, even though he got less points than Hülkenberg, is a better shout. Kevin Magnussen got 16 points, Hülkenberg got 20 points. However, Kevin Magnussen is so consistent getting all of these points, and he's a very aggressive driver. He normally does worse in qualifying, does better in the races, but we've even seen in Austria where he does good in qualifying, he does even better in the races. I don't know how he manages to pull it off, but he always does. Same with Hülkenberg, qualifying good, races good. Both Haas drivers have to be the first and second best shout on your team. Then third place has to be Pierre Gasly. Because he had such a good weekend in Austria, he really did show why he's the better option than Ocon, and I'm kind of wishing I stuck with him instead of Ocon. However, Gasly in that Alpine looked very good in the last few races. They kind of cocked up the strategy in Austria with the points he's getting, with the amount of overtakes he can get, with his qualifying, with his positions gained. He is definitely one of the better options to bring in. And then funnily enough, for the rest of the drivers under 11 million, it's a bit of a 50-50 who to bring in. And I say this because they are decent options. However, most teams will only have about 3 to 4 cheap drivers in. So if you can afford to have double Haas, Pierre Gasly, that's the best shout there. If you can't, Ricciardo and Albon seem to be the biggest drivers on the up, and Albon is definitely the fourth choice, however, over Ricciardo in fifth, because of how cheap he is. You can bring in a cheap driver team with Albon at 8.5 million, and he's just so worth it. And even at Canada, where it looks like he didn't do well, he shouldn't have got that -20. He got very unlucky with Sainz spinning out and crashing into him, and even before that, he showed with his points, if he didn't have the -20, he would have been one of the biggest performing cheap drivers there. So I really do think Albon fourth place, if you can bring him into your team as well. At the minute, Ricciardo's been having race after race that's been good, basically since Canada, and it's been the opposite for Tsunoda. Tsunoda's been in decline since he's re-signed to VCARB in Canada. So definitely look out for Ricciardo if you have enough space for him. And then for the other two, Tsunoda and Ocon, the issue is they are on the decline. And by all means, they're not bad drivers. If you have them in your team, don't worry too much. However, I'd recommend trying to steer clear of them. And it's bad because both of them are in my team. However, I'm probably going to have to just deal with that at the minute. And then finally, driver-wise, let's talk about Stroll, as this is Stroll's last race. He's officially at 14.6 million. If he goes up by 0.5 million, then he will no longer be an option to use. So anyone who's got Stroll, get him in, get that 0.5 million increase, and then reap the rewards and drop back down to someone cheaper. Because yes, once he's over 15 million, he will not be worth it, as he will be considered a premium driver. And a premium driver only getting around 10 to 20 points isn't good enough. You need premium drivers like Norris, Verstappen, Piastri, Hamilton, Russell, the likes. Then let's talk about the premium drivers that you could choose going into this F1 Fantasy Grand Prix week. And to start it off, the worst ones to go nowhere near, of course, is Sergio Perez. He hasn't done really anything in the last few weeks. He's more likely to crash out, if anything. I would stay clear. It doesn't look like he's going to be even the Ferraris, Mercedes, McLarens, or his teammate anytime soon. So he's a bit of a no-go. And then both Ferraris of Carlos Sainz first, I think isn't the best choice. Yes, sometimes he gets ahead of one Mercedes, but he never really ends up ahead of both. And when you're picking a premium driver, it has to be the best teams. So I wouldn't go near any of Ferrari, including Leclerc. He got quite unlucky in Austria, and he is a decent shout. However, when you've got both Mercedes and both McLaren ready to be picked, it's just not worth it risking it going for a Ferrari. Then the drivers that I would choose, Piastri is the best of the middle premium drivers. He's been getting really unlucky recently with his results. Obviously, he's had loads of qualifying drama in Austria. He almost won the race. And he's just been doing overall decent, but he could be doing better. And I think going into Silverstone, we will see that. And I expect him to be coming third place. And then right behind him, in second and third place, is both Mercedes boys. Even though Hamilton didn't do as well in Austria, I still think he's the more consistent driver. Does better at overtaking, qualifies worse, does better, which is better F1 fantasy-wise. And Russell, although he got quite lucky with the Austrian Grand Prix win, he is a good option. Still don't think he's as good as Piastri or Hamilton. However, if you see that you don't have enough money because he's pretty cheap for a premium driver, he is the driver I would go for. Now, of course, like usual, Verstappen second place, Norris first place. Driver of the day, potential fastest lap for either of them. Both of them are going at it most of the times. So I don't expect anyone to be getting close to them in the rankings or points-wise anytime soon in F1 Fantasy. However, Norris still is the better option as he still gets more points even in second place. Then moving on to the Constructors, we have the best three, which is still Red Bull at first place. It's because of their fastest pit stops that they normally get. It was a bit of an anomaly seeing Ferrari last weekend getting them. However, with Verstappen coming first place most of the time and Perez Perez getting 7th to 8th, normally good enough on a normal weekend to be the best team out there, closely followed by McLaren, who look like they are closing down on those podium positions, where most of the time they're even getting fastest lap now, which does get added to Constructors, driver of the day doesn't. So it really is between Red Bull and McLaren for that top spot as a constructor, so you really want to actually be kind of having both Red Bull and McLaren as your top two constructors. And again, I do need to reiterate, even though in Austria they both didn't look well, it's because Verstappen and Norris crashed out, and hopefully they don't carry on making this a habit, because if they carry on doing this, then they're not good options. However, you kind of have to take the risk as they are just a cut above the Mercedes and the Ferraris. However, the Mercedes are third place, because if you pair them up with the McLarens, it is still a decent team if you have two premium drivers. And like we saw, if they do crash, they will pick up the pieces and be one of the better constructors to have. And then again, to reiterate, please do not use Ferrari if you can, because they are sort of looking like a dead team at the minute. They really can't get into the podium positions, and you need, as a constructor, to have at least one of your drivers on the podium to be getting all of those points and pushing for fastest lap and driver of the day, which they're really not at the minute. And yes, Sainz did get a podium at Austria, but obviously it was because two people crashed out, and you can't be relying on that every single weekend. Then moving on to the team selections, I will go through every team that you should be looking at going into Silverstone, from anywhere to mid-range teams, if you've got around 112 to 180 million, if you've got more than 180 million, and if you've got less than 110 million as well. So we'll start off with the mid-team value range, and at this range, you're probably going to be wanting to look at a single premium driver build, as anyone in this range can afford to have Norris with good constructors. However, it's a little bit too much to ask to have a second premium driver there. So you could have a team that resembles something like this. And in this team, you have Lando Norris, that looks like the best premium driver, which is a must at this point in F1 Fantasy. You have double Haas, which I've already spoken about as why they are such good options. Albon, again, one of the cheaper drivers and one of the better scoring drivers. Zhou, a bit of a dud driver. However, on his day, he can still give you a few points, and he's a better option than Sargent and Bottas, with Red Bull and McLaren as the best two constructors. However, there are some alternatives to this team. You have a bit more money to spend at 118.7 million. You could have a team like this where you upgrade Zhou to Gasly, as Gasly is by far a much better F1 Fantasy driver than Zhou Guanyu. Then if you need a team that is a little bit cheaper than 116.3 million at 116.1 million, you could have a team like this, which is replacing Kevin Magnussen for Zhou Guanyu, which of course will downgrade your team a little bit. However, at 116.1 million, a lot more people will be able to afford this. And then if you still don't have 116.1 million, then you could use this team for 113.8 million. All of these teams will be having Red Bull and McLaren, as they are the epitome of the one single premium driver build. You have to have the two strongest constructors with these builds. However, if you can't afford any better drivers, you can of course have both Saubers, Albon and Hulkenberg. The main thing is you don't really want to be having Sargent in these teams. You can have Sargent instead of Bottas or Zhou. However, this will really detrimentally affect your team, but if you've only got around 111 to 112 million, then I could see why you need to do this. Now let's move on to the two premium driver builds, and there are three sub-genres to this build, and basically this is because you should only be doing these two premium driver builds if you can afford to have Red Bull, McLaren with two premium drivers, McLaren, Mercedes with two premium drivers, or Mercedes and Red Bull with two premium drivers as well. So let's start off with the first expensive team, which is 125.6 million, which will include Norris and Piastri as your two premium drivers with Red Bull and McLaren. By all means, a great team. The only real downside of this team is Logan Sargent. However, it's a price you have to pay for such amazing premium drivers and the best two constructors. You'll never have to worry about any other teams. This will most likely be one of the highest scoring teams each weekend. Now, if you don't have 125.6 million, you could have this team with downgrading Hulkenberg to Zhou, which is 124.1 million. And then if you need to save even more money, you could build this team here, which will set you back 123.4 million in team value. And the main thing with these teams is if you're having the best two constructors and the best two premium drivers, it doesn't matter much about the cheap drivers because you are so overpowered on every other single aspect of your team. However, if you don't like having such bad cheap drivers, there are alternatives that I will talk about soon. Now, one of them that I won't talk about is the Red Bull and Mercedes team, again with Norris and Piastri, Norris 2 times, and that is because I've been looking at how you would make the Red Bull and Mercedes team, and it just doesn't work. It'd be a much better choice to go for Red Bull and McLaren, even with worse, cheaper drivers, or to go for McLaren and Mercedes to really improve your team. This middle ground is kind of no man's land, and I don't agree with anyone building a team around this, unless you have to do it because you run out of free transfers. And the gist of it is because there is a smaller gap between the cheaper drivers of Sargent to, let's say, Bottas. There's less than a 10-point gap guaranteed every weekend, whereas Mercedes to McLaren could be a bigger jump than 10 points, and that is the reasoning why it's not the best team to have. So let's talk about some of the McLaren Mercedes builds you can make, and the first one is the Norris Verstappen build with McLaren and Mercedes with the cheapest drivers. This will set you back 125.9 million, so it's the most expensive team out there. However, they're the best 2 premium drivers and top 3 best constructors in your team as well. So it's a really nice team. However, you've really got to weigh up your opinions if you have this sort of money, if you want to have Norris Verstappen or Red Bull and McLaren and lower down your premium driver. I would probably go with the Norris Piastri over Norris Verstappen with Red Bull and McLaren. However, it is up to you. This option is there if you want it. Now, if you can't afford this, you also have the upper medium team, which will cost 123.4 million, and it basically gets rid of Verstappen to bring in better cheap drivers, and it is also much cheaper. Then you have the medium team, that is 121.6 million, which replaces Magnussen for Albon. Then you have the lower median team, which will set you back 120.2 million in team value, and it is decreasing Hulkenberg to Bottas. And then finally you have the cheap team with McLaren and Mercedes with 2 premium drivers, which will cost you 117 million. So again, it sort of goes into the medium level team value ranges, really suffer on the cheaper driver options, but it is definitely a very good option as well. So those are all of the 2 premium driver teams. Now let's talk about the cheap teams for anyone who's got less than 110 million budget at this point. Now, the expensive cheap team at 109.9 million will have Norris as your single premium driver, again with Red Bull and McLaren. Now, I know I've talked about budgeting quite a bit to improve your team recently. However, with this team, because you've got 4 cheap drivers, you could still go up 2 million if they all go up 0.5 million respectively. With the budgets as well, you just need to be getting in points now, as it's so hard to increase your budget right now in this stage of F1 Fantasy, as not many drivers are moving around bar the cheap drivers, so this still could be recognized as a budget building team. You do again struggle on the cheap drivers, however you get the most points from Norris and the most points from your constructors. Then a medium level at 104.9 million will see you dropping Red Bull for Mercedes. However, if you really do need the money because you've only got less than 105 million, you can also see Bottas improving into Hulkenberg. However, overall this team's slightly worse at 104.9 million. This is the best you will be getting. And then for anyone who's just started at only at 100 million, this is the team you want to bring in. Again, it very much focuses on a premium driver with 2 good constructors, McLaren and Mercedes. That's the best you need right now. Budget wise, it could go up quite a lot as you got Piastri instead of Norris, as you can't afford Norris with 2 good constructors. Overall, not the best team, but a good starting build for anyone that needs it. That is all the team selections for this week. Let's go ahead and talk about the chips. So chips wise this week, I believe you should not be using any chip, as wildcard at the minute, the meta hasn't really changed since Austria. So if you've got a team similar to your 1 premium driver or 2 premium driver builds, you shouldn't have to worry too much. And then again, limitless, extra DRS, always better to be used on a sprint race weekend. I know some people got quite unlucky in Austria. That's how the cookie crumbles sometimes. However, overall, it is much better statistically to use them on sprint race weekends. And then for final fix, I'll talk about that later in my streams, as it will only be needed if something terrible happens in qualifying with one of your drivers. Because remember, you can only use final fix on 1 driver and not any constructors. Then for my league, thank you all so much for joining. We have 780 of you right now. I'm pushing for 800 by the end of July. So thank you all so much for joining. And here is the top 5 shout out. Remember, there is a £200 prize pool for the top 5 winners in this league. So first up, congratulations Colt View at Flat Out, keeping that first place. Well done. Then we have Leapers 1 in second place, again keeping second place. Congratulations to you. Enema de G in 4th place. Congratulations. And then we have a new person in 5th place, which is Bandsagging. Congratulations to getting into 5th, and congratulations to all top 5 of you, and to anyone who basically is in the top 15, top even 50. Well done to all of you, because it's such a competitive league at the minute. Well done to all of you. But anyway, that is my F1 Fantasy video for today. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all got something very useful out of this video. I'll be back with another F1 Fantasy video on Friday after FP1 and FP2 for anyone who can't join my live stream on Saturday, and I'll have more F1 content out this week in general. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a good rest of your day and have a good rest of your week. Bye bye.